On our conversation segment today, we will be looking at the IMF's reports on Nigeria, the progress, projections, and policy imperatives, and what they mean for Nigerians and businesses. Our guest is economist and policy analyst, Yusha'u Aliyu. It's good to have you in the studio, sir.
No, thank you. Good afternoon.
Great.
Thank you.
Now, the IMF has praised Nigeria's fiscal and monetary reforms, especially the tax reform. Are you surprised by this positive outlook?
It's not a surprise because most of the periodic review that is targeted in Africa is focused on Nigeria. And one interesting thing about the review is the fact that by admitting that the reform agenda of the government is working, it has to do with also the political scenario in the economy. It is true that IMF is reviewing all economies in the world, and Nigeria is not an exception, like I said in the beginning. However, some of these performance can be seen on ground. Once you have, for instance, a refinery that is domestic and then taking away over 50% of the requirement of PMS, is a relief to the economy. And that shows that the Petroleum Industry Act is working, because this is the first time in Nigerian history in 2024 in December, it passes without fuel queues. And not only that, the recent tax reform, which is fiscal in nature, has shown that the entire nation is unified politically. And that is why I give emphasis on that, because at the beginning of some of this reform, there are certain political agitation, especially from the northern part where I come from, with respect of who is to enjoy the value-added tax, is it by derivation or by attribution. But at the end of the day, we have seen how our parliament were able to sit down and bring out a very comprehensive tax, which I think in the next 12 months, Nigerians will begin to see the importance of why there is Nigerian Revenue Service, and also the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation, and Fiscal Commission will have its own way to now make a new sharing formula on how this benefit can go to different political units.
All right. Now, while the fund is impressed with our reforms, especially in restoring financial discipline, like strengthening the central bank's independence and cutting back on things like the Ways and Means facility, they are also pushing for Nigeria to get off the FATF grey list. Now, what does being on this grey list mean for Nigeria's economy, and what specific steps, can the government take in order to exit it?
I think I may digress a little from the IMF perspective, looking at being a practical observer in the nation's economy. What we are looking for now is not financial discipline based on fiscal policies, but what we need is complementing prosperity to general performance in the economy. What I mean here is, of course, we solidified the monetary values, and we have seen how absence of MPR has led to the decrease in inflation for the first time. For us to have 22.97 inflation without increase in MPR, that shows that the system or the economic system is working, and also that shows that other factors that are needed to make adjustments so that the stability can be more comprehensive to the growth of the GDP. Not only that, also there is need for us to also look at not only the performance of the monetary, but the performance of foreign exchange, whereby our foreign exchange is now solidified above 40 billion. If you have that, it means that Naira has to be gaining strength, as you highlighted in your report. Today, we have a system where Naira is gaining, and this gains means a lot to what we consume, and also means a lot to what we are saving, and also means a lot in terms of fiscal investment, in terms of capital investment in the economy. And we require all this to develop the economy so that the prospect of 3.4% GDP growth rate is achieved. If that one is achieved, one fundamental aspect which I want to dwell on is that even when inflation is 22.97%, we should remember that it's a double-digit inflation, and it is still eroding people's income. So there is need to put further applications of economic tools to make sure that inflation is decreasing and also the purchasing power of the consumers is increasing. And that is what can liberate the prosperity which I have highlighted in the course of this explanation.
All right, speaking of GDP growth, the IMF projects a 3.4% growth for 2025. How realistic is this figure given current economic fundamentals?
Like I said, based on the reforms that is going, in fact, it's not going to be much visible this year, but for 2026, like I said, when the full fiscal reform is going to take effect, that where you have the new tax laws, you have consumers that are somehow relieved from payment of certain taxes, and at the same time also looking at the investment that tax reform will bring, so that Nigeria possibly, what we are expecting is that even if we have to go to financial market to augment our budget deficit from the state structure to the federal structure, we are expecting this reduction when fully the tax reform began to yield results in terms of our performance of revenues.
Security, infrastructure deficits, and climate resilience also came up as big concerns in the IMF's report. They are saying Nigeria needs to tackle these to keep the economy stable. Where should the government prioritize its pending these issues, and how can they do it without adding to the debt burden, which the IMF says is already a growing risk?
IMF is just highlighting key issues that is derailing Nigeria from achieving the prospect of 3.4% GDP. Climate change. Once you see erosion washing away our farmland, and that means that people are going, that is, people are dying, their investment is going, our agriculture is draining, then what is more necessary now is to look at an alternative. If rainy season farming is attached to flooding and a lot of washaways, then we have to look at dry farming. That is an alternative. Not only doing that, once you also look at what IMF is emphasizing on security, it means that our production lines are becoming empty. How? Why you are placing farmers to become IDPs is directly reducing the capacity of agricultural output. So what is more important is a system where government has to be involved, communities has to be involved, media have to be involved to make sure that the right information is communicated, because the IMF highlighted how good informations are communicated to citizens, because sometimes bad headline news is causing a lot of disturbances to listeners, is causing a lot of disturbances to customers. So what we need to do in terms of communicating, instead of communicating pump price is rising, let us be communicating to Nigeria that pump price is reducing. And if it is reducing, it's reducing significantly. And at the same time also, I have to also emphasize, you see, these reforms, targeted monetary, targeted fiscal, targeted agriculture, targeted education. But above all, what is more fundamental is to make sure that people are secured not only to do farming, but are secured in their consumption. And that is what brought about the issue of food index. Let us know the metric tons that is required, for instance, of different categories of crops that is grown in Nigeria. Let us know the deficit, because it is important. Once you have a very large population, you can see from the news analysis this afternoon how Nigerians were able to lead 7.9 billion in terms of digital transactions, which is obvious. It can be seen anywhere you go. In a village, there's a POS machine. People are transacting. People are receiving payment. Any point. So once you have that one, we need also to skew people's investment. Like I said, the importance of monetary reform has to do with how our banking services are rendered. And we can see directly that the CBN now is proactive in trying to recapitalize the financial institution so that if bigger companies that want to invest in the capacity either in agriculture, in manufacturing, will be able to access this fund.
All right, Mr. Wuche, let's move to another aspect of the report. The report called for a review of Nigeria's 2025 budget, saying it is based, on overly optimistic oil price assumptions. With oil price, trailing, oil revenue trailing, and inflation at 22.9%. What practical changes do you think the government should make to the budget to avoid a financial crisis?
Once crude oil prices are going down, it has to do with exogenous forces. The first one is America First by Trump. Americans don't want crude prices to be higher, and they do everything to make sure that crude oil prices are going down. But like I told you in the beginning, Nigeria has to shift from pegging our own budgetary system with crude oil prices. Since we are able to now reform our taxes, let us based on the generations of our revenue. So we are expecting budget 2026 to target more on what the economy can produce rather than oil prices that is likely to be hampered by different forces around the globe.
All right. The IMF also stresses strong policy coordination and communication to make its reforms work. From your perspective, how can the government better explain these changes to Nigerians, especially when trust is low and people are feeling the pinch of high living costs?
The best way to communicate to Nigerians is not different from what in Hausa is what a dog says. If they say that that we are having a celebration in our home, let me see it on ground. So the best way to communicate to Nigerians is to have prices that is equal to the income of individuals. And that can be achieved easily. The president has done it last year by making sure that import that was suspended was given a chance to come and augment the food deficit. The next thing we are expecting is for all these utility increases in production in their services halted for many reasons. One is to bring the capacity of the purchasing of different individuals. That will now be well communicated. But in terms of explaining government policies, government has to make sure that not only federal government is explaining economic policies for the economic development of the state. It should be a mandate, because in each and every corner of Nigeria, there is local FM station which can communicate positive information with regard to what is expected from me, what is expected from my senator, and what is expected from Mr. President.
All right. In one sentence, beyond 2025, what key reforms should Nigeria prioritize to sustain growth and reduce dependence on oil?
Our industrial policy, of course, because once we now, after focusing on monetary and fiscal, then the next thing is to face industrialization. What type of industries? We should identify special economic zones. We should identify the right key industries that can be assisted to produce. And like you said in one sentence, but we must increase the capacity of crude oil processing in Nigeria.
All right. A very big thank you to you, Mr. Yusha'u Aliyu, for sharing your thoughts with us on Business Express this afternoon.
I'm grateful.
All right. Moving on, Vice President.